You sold your car. You got a fair price. It made complete financial sense. And yet, weeks later, you're sitting in a rideshare, staring at the window, and you feel it. This quiet, inexplicable ache, like something was taken from you, like you were somehow diminished. You tell yourself it's irrational. It's just a machine, metal, rubber, and wiring. It doesn't think. It doesn't remember you. But you remember it. Today, we're going to explore the psychology behind why selling a car, one of the most routine financial decisions a person can make, can feel like a surprisingly personal loss, and why that feeling is far more normal and far more scientifically grounded than you might think. Let's start with the economics. In the late 1980s, behavioral economists Richard Thaler, Daniel Kahneman, and Jack Netsch conducted a now famous experiment. They gave participants coffee mugs and then offered to trade them for an equivalent item, chocolate bars of similar value. Rationally, roughly half should have traded, but most people refused to give up their mug. Why? Because owning the mug had already made it feel more valuable. This is the endowment effect, the well-documented cognitive bias where we assign greater value to things simply because we own them. And it applies to cars in a powerful way. Think about how you priced your car before selling it. Did you feel the asking price on Craigslist was offensive? Did you find yourself mentally listing every oil change, every road trip, every carefully avoided scratch, as if those memories added monetary value to a depreciating asset? That's the endowment effect at work. But here's where it gets more interesting. The endowment effect isn't just about money. Researchers have found it's amplified when an object is tied to personal identity, and few objects in modern life are as identity-laden as a car. Your car was where you listened to the same album on repeat during a hard month. It was the vehicle, literally, of your independence. It carried you to job interviews, first dates, hospital visits, and midnight drives when you just needed to move. When you sold it, you weren't just transferring a title. You were handing over a container of self. Psychologists have long studied what's called object attachment, the emotional bonds humans form with non-living things. It's not pathological. It's deeply human. In a seminal framework by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Eugene Rochberg-Halton, objects in our lives serve as extensions of the self. They become symbols of who we are, who we were, and who we aspired to be. A first car, especially, carries enormous psychological weight. It represents a threshold, the first taste of autonomy, the first version of freedom that felt truly yours. But this applies beyond the first car. Any vehicle we'd owned long enough starts to absorb our narrative. It witnesses us. It holds the geography of our lives, the commutes, the arguments, the sing-alongs, the breakdowns on the side of the road at 2 a.m. that somehow became stories we tell at dinner parties. There's a concept in psychology called cathexis, the investment of mental and emotional energy into a person, object, or idea. We cathect onto our cars. They become psychologically significant, and when they're gone, the energy we invested in them has nowhere to go. This is why some people find themselves driving past where they used to park it, or searching its license plate online, half hoping it still exists in the world somewhere, carrying their history forward. Here is where we get to something genuinely profound. For many people, the regret after selling a car isn't really about the car at all. It's about identity loss. Psychologist Erik Erikson described identity as something we construct, not just internally, but through our relationships with the external world. The objects we choose, maintain, and present to others are part of how we signal who we are. Your car was part of that signal. Maybe it was a truck that said, "I am capable, self-reliant, ready for anything." Maybe it was a vintage car that said, "I have taste, I value craft, I exist slightly outside the mainstream." Maybe it was just a reliable sedan that said, "I am a person who shows up, who gets things done." Whatever it communicated, to others and to yourself, it was a piece of your identity architecture. When you sold it, that piece was removed. And identity structures, like real ones, don't simply absorb the loss of a wall without some structural instability. This is particularly acute during life transitions. Selling a car that accompanied a relationship that has since ended. Selling the family car when the kids have grown up and left. selling the sports car when the budget said it's time to be practical. In these moments, the car becomes a proxy for something larger that is also ending, and the sale becomes a kind of ceremony for a grief that doesn't quite have another outlet. And sometimes the heaviest part of this experience doesn't happen after the sale. It happens before. Anticipatory grief is a well-established psychological phenomenon, most commonly discussed in the context of terminal illness, when loved ones begin grieving a loss before it has technically occurred. But researchers have found that the same mechanism activates around any significant anticipated loss, including the loss of meaningful objects. The weeks before you sold your car, did you start noticing things differently? The way the morning light hit the hood, the particular resistance of that one sticky window, the smell of the interior that you'd stopped registering years ago but suddenly found achingly familiar. That hyper-awareness is anticipatory grief. Your mind, preparing for loss, begins to archive. It catalogs. It tries to hold on. And this is the cruelest part of the psychology. That heightened period of attention can make the attachment even stronger, which makes the eventual loss feel even more significant. You grieve, and in grieving, you deepen the bond, which amplifies the grief. So what do you do with all of this? First, give yourself permission to take the feeling seriously. Calling it irrational doesn't make it go away. The psychological literature is clear. Object attachment is real. The endowment effect is real. Identity disruption is real. You are not being sentimental or weak. You are being human. Second, consider what the car represented that you can now consciously honor in another way. If it represented freedom, how do you reclaim that? If it represented a certain era of your life, what ritual might help you close that chapter with intention rather than regret? Third, remember that what you're mourning is almost always larger than the object itself. The car was a lens. What you're actually missing is a version of yourself, a time period, a feeling of possibility. And those things can be accessed through memory, through story, through reconnecting with the people who shared those roads with you. Finally, and this may sound strange, consider writing it a goodbye. Not because it can hear you, but because you need to say it. Many therapists working in narrative therapy encourage their clients to address objects, places, and even periods of time directly as a way of honoring transitions that might otherwise be silently swallowed. The driveway is empty now, the oil stain remains, and somewhere out there, your car is carrying someone else's story forward. But here's what the psychology ultimately tells us. The fact that you grieve means you were fully present. You lived in those miles. You showed up. You paid attention, even when you didn't know you were. That's not something to be embarrassed about. That's something to honor. If this resonated with you, subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And leave a comment below. What car do you still think about?